I think we have a few questions in the chat box. Shall we take them up now? So I think the first one was, I think, Mr. Yan. Your PPT is very good. Kindly explain your slide number 11 with an example.
Yeah, I need to double check which one was slide 11.
This was, I think, the methodology for determining greenhouse gas emission saving.
Yeah, it was the supply chain I had with the different aspects of how to accumulate these emissions. So, as I said, the logic behind is that you look at every step in the supply chain regarding the GHG emissions, and then you add the processing emissions for each step. You add the processing, let's say, how much emissions is it that your solar park, the electricity from the solar park, for example, uses. These emissions, and actually in the delegated act, there is this word which is already, this wording which is already useful. If this is renewable, under the requirements outlined, the GHG footprint of the renewable electricity is 0. So this you already know. There you start with 0. And then you go step by step. How is the electricity transported to your electrolyzer? You may have emissions using a grid. You may have emissions using this direct connection of option 1 I outlined. Then in the electrolyzer, you have certain chemicals maybe that come with an emission. And you add all these emissions. There are certain emission factors for it in databases. You add these emissions, you say how much in 1 year, for example, how much emissions are there, how many chemicals are used, how many transportation emissions I have. You add this all together throughout the supply chain. And then you come out with a final result, which also means, and this is a process which is then checked through certification, the different actors along the supply chain, they need to forward the GHG emissions to each other so that in every step, you can calculate the processing emissions, the transport emissions, and in the end, on the certificate, you have a final value, which is the result then.
Thank you. I think the second question was, different countries have their own methods of counting of type 1, type 2, and type 3 emissions. How can we generalize and make it uniform, which is universally accepted?
Yes, this is a good point, because I would say on a global scale, this methodology for accounting GHG emission, which is in the RED2, which is, as I said, has been around for years. It's a little bit special, so to say. It's a little bit unique. However, you have these type 1, type 2 emissions, GHG protocol are examples where these other methodologies, or IPHE is also developing a methodology for GHG accounting. However, I think you need to still, this European framework, so to say, is very strict on the methodology. However, it's similar. There you will, once you look closer into it, you will find similar aspects also to other emission accounting methodologies. So you need to at least demonstrate that you've showed it in or calculated in this one method that I explained a bit. However, there are overlaps, and this you can also do. So it's not like you don't need to calculate twice, but you may have like calculating for different results or for different aspects to it. So there are overlaps, but still you need to comply with this methodology that are outlined, that is set in this RED2 in the Renewable Energy Directive.
Thank you. There's a third question. Are we moving towards a variety of voluntary certification schemes for hydrogen, or is there still hope for a unified, harmonized European standard?
Also, again, very good question. I like also it said, is there still hope? I think from the aspect of the certification setup I explained in this voluntary schemes, I think the way that is set there actually makes also from the European Commission point of view a lot of sense, because interpreting this and the whole certification approach is not left to them, it's left to the voluntary schemes. And at least for hydrogen, I cannot predict how it will actually unfold. but at least in the context of biofuels, which has been around for like 10 years, this was actually, so to say, that there are many schemes under the recognized by the EU. This has also some benefit. This has the benefit of the schemes, so to say, competing a bit with one each other. And in the biofuel context, we also had developments where the demand was clearly looking towards more sustainable products. So the schemes, which actually had probably even more sustainability criteria than the ones I outlined in delegated acts, they probably were the most successful ones, although this is like difficult to measure and to demonstrate. However, this competition is also a benefit. The bigger question here, this is the European part. If you look on a global scale, there are also the PTX hub. We are engaged in aspects in G7, for example, harmonizing certification schemes and certification approaches. I think this is, my personal opinion is this is a long way to go. But there are, of course, efforts at least to align certain requirements. And I think it's important not only to mention certification, because certification is a proof to comply with certain standards, a tool, so to say, a tool to comply with certain requirements. What I think is also crucial is that we talk about the requirements on a global scale. Can we align on certain requirements? What is renewable hydrogen? What is green hydrogen there? I think what I explained in the European case, they moved forward quite detailed, quite quickly, but I think this is worth looking at and worth considering. But yeah, hard to answer this question with a clear and definite answer, I guess.
Thank you. I think the last question
If I might add, Professor Dr. Jacoba, one important takeaway is that there's several schemes that all comply with the rules of the EU. So in the end, it's not even necessarily a concern of projects in India to look for the one and only, but to just go to one of them. You have actually the luxury to go to any of the schemes which is recognized by the EU, obviously, to then be certified. So if you're not looking to, if your motivation is to have one certification scheme, then obviously there's no hope for that. But the positive message is that it is not even a problem if the scheme is recognized by the EU. So you can choose any of these.
But there is no contradiction among them.
They all need to they all at least need to comply with the delegated act requirements that the two of us basically demonstrate. That's the bar they all need to fulfill, and it's all if you're certified under one, it's also all fine to be certified under one. That's
Anyone.
the basic requirement.
The other question was, if EU is looking for green hydrogen as a sustainable source of energy, but is not concerned about whether it's renewable or non-renewable, how can they say it's a sustainable source if we think of LCA? I'm not very clear about this question. I don't know whether you've understood it. I'll repeat it. If EU is looking for green hydrogen as a sustainable source of energy, but not concerned about whether it's renewable or non-renewable, how can we say that it's sustainable source if we think of life cycle assessment? You get the question?
I think
there's a misunderstanding.
I can try to answer it. I think from a renewable perspective, the EU is very much looking towards renewables. And as I said, these aims that or these requirements that seem complicated, and I mean are complicated in a way, they have the whole benefit and the whole narrative of really ensuring and being in line with ambitious goals that the European Commission has set in regard to renewable targets, in regard to climate targets. And this is the whole narrative of these rules. In regard to the LCA, I think it's also, it makes sense that you don't have just the renewable, let's say, rule that I explained in this first delegated act. I think it also makes sense, and this is what the Commission does with its GHG threshold I explained, So there's also an aspect of LCA that needs also to be complied with. So they have two, let's say, leverages here to really ensure that we are talking about sustainably sourced electricity. I don't know, I hope this went into the right direction, but yeah.
There are
Excellent, excellent. I must say, really impressed by both of your presentations, Jan-Henrik and Simon. There's still more than 120 participants in this webinar. So I guess this speaks for itself. And really looking forward, Simon, to have the first certifier to get accredited and recognized by the EU to do the certifications, or as you had suggested, there can be already sort of test certifications. I think Jan-Henrik also mentioned it. Maybe you can shed some more light on this. Is there already some certifiers that are not waiting till the delegated act finally gets published? I mean, it's adopted but not published. So one could actually already start the work. Could you shed some more light on it? And are you in touch with the certifiers which would be interested to certify Indian projects?
Yeah, so maybe Jan, I go ahead. So yes, there is, as Jan has shown, there's, for example, certified TÜV Süd and TÜV Rhineland who want to be recognized by the EU but are not yet. But this doesn't mean that their certification scheme is not up for testing. So since I'm representing Con Energy Consult as a freelancer, but also the TÜV Rhineland, obviously I am in touch with TÜV Rhineland. So if there is interest in projects, kindly contact me and we can look into what TÜV Rhineland can offer. What they offer actually at the moment is a standard, that a certification scheme that is still has to be recognized, as I mentioned, but it will be a pre-assessment of your project, also helping you to open gates to financial investors. So if you're looking at these criteria and you have a third-party due diligence certifier saying this is renewable, obviously this waives a lot of uncertainties for investors. So yes, these standards are up in the market. TÜV Rhineland is not the only one. Others also have these standards. I can only speak for TÜV Rhineland because I'm in contact directly with them. But yes, this exists.
Yeah, maybe if I may add, also maybe a little bit broader answer to this. In general, this whole certification approach is set up in a way that you don't need to wait until the first drop of fuel is finished. Also, this is not hydrogen and PDX related. Also, in the past with any other fuels, the certification set up the voluntary schemes, and I mention now all of them. They are happy to be approached also with pilots. They're looking forward to certification, which on plants which are not yet running. However, you need to have, let's say, a certain set of data, a certain set of a framework that is ready for your project to have actually something that can be checked. So this is also in general not only related to hydrogen, but this is always possible even before the first drop of fuel, for example, is actually produced. So this is always an option.
Great, thank you very much, Jan-Henrik Schell. So we are just waiting for the first certification scheme to get recognized, and for the first certifier wanting to actually start certifying, even on a test basis, Indian green hydrogen projects. And if they are compliant, and especially if India can be considered as one bidding zone, which is one of the major concerns so far as we could make out. And I am actually very, very pleased now to see Dr. Prashad Chafikat from MNRE here with us. Thank you very much, sir. You remain in this webinar. That means we may have hit the nerve of the right topic today. Thank you very much for being with us today. Deputy Secretary in the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and in charge of the Green Hydrogen Mission of India. So a big honor having you here with us. If there's any questions or any remarks you would like to give to the audience, you may be welcome to do so now.
If you are aware, first of all, thanks a lot for letting me be here. I will just make a very few remarks. You are aware that we have released the draft hydrogen standard just a few days back, if and we do plan to have further public consultations with respect to that standard, and we hope to notify it very soon, because the bidding what we will give for the incentive program, that will be dependent upon our definition of green hydrogen. So I would be glad to hear whether our definition, what we have proposed as of now, whether it meets the German standards, and if not, what else is required for it to meet the European and the German standard. That's all I would say this.
Great, we'll take note of this. And yes, Pooja Divya, please let's do a follow-up on this request. Yeah, thank you.
There are a lot of other questions. Do you think we have time to take it up, Mr. Tobias, or will that be taken up subsequently? I think I can see.
Pooja is the master of ceremony, and you're the head of the sub-working group. So up to you, madam.
Pooja, do we have time to take up?
Yeah, we can do 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes. So yeah, questions and then.
So it says this: India has the potential for producing solar or wind energy. Is it feasible to produce renewable as it requires high infrastructure cost, huge land requirement? Very difficult question, I think. I do not know who would like to answer that.
Yeah, maybe I can go ahead. So just making sure I understood the question correctly. I can see it in the chat as well. So just repeating it. So as I said, it has a big potential, and therefore to source it, the question is if it's feasible. I think this is individual project development. If this is feasible, look into where the renewable energy source is located. Where do you want to build your plant? What is your grid connection? Are you directly connected? All these things. So I do believe that this is feasible, as I've looked into the electricity system. Hope that answers the question. But high infrastructure costs obviously are always associated with these projects, especially if you plan to export. You are in the billions, so to reduce specific costs of levelized cost of hydrogen. Yeah, be prepared to spend a lot of money on infrastructure.
The second question is related to buildings. Do we consider buildings greenhouse gas emissions in the calculation?
Yeah, this is clear to answer. This methodology is set up in a way where no infrastructure, no buildings are looked at in this emission of this fuel. So as I said, no roads, not even building the solar park, the wind farm, not any building of the actual plant, is everything like that is not included in this.
And can we use fossil fuel power DG set for emergency purpose only? Not very sure where this pertains.
I mean, this would be a detailed question for a GHG emission assessment, which is hard to conduct here right now.
Okay.
I guess it's hard to answer. I guess this has to be looked at in detail.
All right.
But maybe one comment on this, just like to make it really clear. Now, as you had said, on one electrolyzer system, anyone is allowed to produce any kind of hydrogen of any color. So yes, you can do that, but you won't get it certified, and then you cannot, or you can still export it to EU, but you may not find a buyer. No? So yes, you can produce hydrogen even from coal and then export it to Japan or whatever. So yes, several sources of electricity are possible, but if you want to have green hydrogen as per the EU definition, then you won't get it certified, at least for the amount of hydrogen you're producing with non-renewable energy sources.
Yes, this is by the way, in this methodology there is this concept of co-processing as well. I mean, the question was about emergency purposes. I think it's a little bit different, but even co-processing, if you have a part renewable input, part non-renewable input by energetic allocation, this can be differentiated. And then, but then it's true what Tobias said, then of course only the part where you can really demonstrate this comes from renewable, also in the DHG emission, still complying with the DHG threshold I explained, then only this part, of course, can be certified and then exported into Europe under the policies and quotas. As we heard Simon saying correctly, this is only export. You can do basically anything, but not certified under these criteria then.
Okay, there's another query from we are India's first waste to hydrogen project. How do you think we can get ourselves certified to have partners from EU for exporting the hydrogen that we produce?
If you want, Jan, I think this is quickly answered. You can't, because it's under Delegated Act. It only looks at renewable fuels of non-biological origin. If you're burning waste, then ideally you're burning waste that has sucked CO2 out of the atmosphere before, and that would be more or less biomass. So biomass is not part of renewable hydrogen.
The second question they have is, will it have any effect on green certification? So I think that is already answered. There's a deadline of December 2029 under the Delegation Act, which makes project developers at risk. What will happen beyond the deadline? At present, project investors and developers cannot ascertain the LCOH and offtake agreement. How can we address this? Whether there will be an extension for this?
I'm not 100% sure what this deadline of December 2029 refers to. I know that there's a change in that, like basically from December to January on the temporal correlation part, which is quarterly and then hourly. Then there's a change, but it's not a specific deadline.
Yeah, but it refers to this, Jan-Hendrik. Yeah. So the relaxed criteria, with grace period until 29. And then the hard criteria coming in from 2030 onwards.
Yeah, I mean, the risk is, I think it's not really a risk, because we know that this will be the case in that time. So if you plan your project and you take these rules and these transition phases into account, you know what is going to come. But I guess the hope is that these criteria after 28 actually will be revised by the European Union to see if this was a good idea or not. So you can gamble and think, okay, after 5 years, we will have a completely different look on the world, and therefore the investment I did in 2024, 25 is now can now be considered as renewable hydrogen. But I think from today's perspective, you need to make sure that you have a plan for the transition after the transition phase. And how to address this is to set up electricity procurements, PPAs, storages, whatever, to assure that you are that you correlate temporally as well.
Yeah, maybe adding one more narrative to this. This now phasing in stricter requirements at a later point in time is the road that was within the several leaks that we had of these delegated acts, which was taken by the European Commission. I think also to some extent because when it was of feedback that they received, there was a big amount of feedback on these delegated acts. In the middle of last year, when there was a proposal published, I think 350 comments also from Indian stakeholders, which was very useful for the Commission. We were also in touch with them, and they said they need this feedback of what works, what doesn't. And I think this phasing in part, I would also probably not describe it as a risk, but something that needs to be accounted for. And this is why at some points, for example, at this temporal correlation, we now have aspects in it that are a little bit phasing stricter requirements in over time.
Okay, I think there are just 2 more questions. Do we have time, Pooja, or shall we close down? Shall
Yeah,
we
we
go
can
ahead?
take 2 more questions. Yeah, we can go ahead. No.
So what are the probable challenges for project commissioning in India, for project commission in India and getting certificate from EU? What are the probable challenges for, I think, project commissioning?
Well, as we've seen, there are some uncertainties, obviously related to the bidding zone concept, but I think there's no general answer to that. You will run into different challenges like land use, restrictions of being too close to the sea, etc. So this would be an individual question of your project.
Okay. And finally, what is a bidding zone? How is this classified outside EU? In India, this terminology is not usually used.
So maybe the presentation will be shared afterwards. There's a few slides that go into detail on that. Kindly refer to that.
Yeah. Okay.